We've all heard the term melting pot to describe America, right? But what if that's not quite the right picture? Today, we're diving into an idea from the first chapter of Thomas Sowell's Ethnic America, the idea of America as a giant, complex, and really fascinating mosaic of completely distinct groups. So let's get into what that actually looks like. Here's our game plan. First, we're going to tear down this myth of the average American. Then we'll get into the actual numbers that show you the mosaic. After that, we'll look at how geography plays a huge role for these groups. And finally, we'll put it all together to explore a totally different way of thinking about disparity in America. All right, first up, let's talk about this concept of a typical or average American. You hear it constantly, right? In the news and political speeches. But does that person even exist?
No, really. Just for a second, try to picture them in your head. What do they do for a living? How old are they? Where do they call home? It's actually a pretty hard question to answer, and, there's a really good reason for that.
And this is the reason why. This so-called average American is just a myth. It's a number on a spreadsheet, a statistical ghost. The reality is a country built on huge, measurable diversity. So let's actually look at what that diversity means when you get down to the details. To really get this mosaic idea, you have to look at the power of demographics. The differences between all these ethnic groups aren't just about, culture or food or history. They are baked into the cold, hard numbers. Let's start with a really stunning example. Median age. Get this. For Mexican Americans, the median age is around 18. For Jewish Americans, it's over 40. Now, that's not some small gap. That is literally an entire generation of difference all living inside the same country. And it's not just about two groups on opposite ends of the spectrum. You can see here that other groups, like Irish Americans, are somewhere in between. Every single group has its own unique age profile, and this one little data point has massive ripple effects. So, who cares? Why does age matter so much? Well, it's pretty simple. Age is a huge predictor of income. Think about it. Someone in their 40s is probably near their career peak. They're going to have way more experience and income than someone who's basically just starting out in their late teens or early 20s. So, of course, a group with a median age of 40 is going to have a different economic picture than a group with a median age of 18. And these differences go way beyond age. Take fertility rates, for example. At one point in time, Polish American women were having children at more than double the rate of Japanese American women. I mean, that's a difference that fundamentally changes the size and the entire structure of a group in just one generation. So we've seen these internal differences, like age and fertility. But where people choose to live is just as critical. Let's take a look at the geography of these groups. Ethnic groups in the U.S. are not spread out evenly like jam on a piece of toast. Not at all. They're actually highly concentrated. Over half of all Mexican Americans live in just two states, California and Texas. Nearly half of all Puerto Ricans live in New York. And a huge number of Cuban Americans are concentrated in Florida. This clustering is one of the most important features of the American mosaic. And here's why that geographic clustering matters so much. If a group is concentrated in a high-income, high-cost-of-living state like New York, their average income stats are going to look completely different than a group concentrated in a lower-income part of the country. Location itself is a massive variable. Okay, so all of this, the age, the geography, it all brings us to the most important argument in this chapter. With all these huge built-in differences, how are we supposed to interpret the economic gaps we see between groups? Well, the book lays out a very clear framework for this, and it's one that's absolutely crucial for understanding a lot of the debates we have today. This right here is the key. When we see a headline about one group earning less than another, our first thought is often discrimination. But this quote pushes back on that. It says, hold on. Those disparities are the starting point for a question, not the final answer. So here's how you'd actually analyze it. Step 1, you see the raw statistical gap. Okay, but then, step 2, you have to adjust for that massive age difference we talked about. Step 3, you adjust for the fact that these groups live in totally different parts of the country with different economies. And only then, after you've accounted for those powerful, non-discriminatory factors, do you analyze whatever gap was left over. And what you find when you use this approach, according to the book, is that a huge chunk of those raw income gaps we see in the headlines can be explained by these internal factors, things like age and location. It just really complicates that simple narrative of disparity equals discrimination. So, let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways? First, the average American is a fantasy. This nation is a mosaic of distinct groups. Second, those groups have enormous, measurable differences in things like age and location. And third, those internal differences are incredibly powerful when it comes to explaining the external economic gaps that we see.
And all of this leaves us with a really tough question to chew on. If the starting points for different groups are so fundamentally different in so many ways, what does equal opportunity actually mean in the real world? It's a lot more complicated than it sounds, and definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks for tuning in.